What would you do if your neighbor was stealing your water and you had the power to destroy his life with just one twist of a valve? No yelling, no police, no confrontation. Just silence, ... and then total collapse. This is the story of how I ruined a freeloading neighbor without lifting a single finger, just pure ice-cold revenge. I never thought buying a house would lead me into a full-blown revenge saga, but here we are. It all started with what looked like a dream deal, a fixer-upper in the middle of the capital city, sold to me by family friends who'd moved abroad. The price, ridiculously low. They needed cash fast, and the house had been sitting vacant for years. I wasn't just buying a property, I was stepping into a neighborhood that had long forgotten what a rightful owner looked like. When I moved in, the place had this eerie, almost post-apocalyptic vibe. The front door was still sealed with a padlock knot. A real one, just a rusted latch holding it shut. There was no gate, no visible sign that someone lived there. Honestly, if I passed by it myself, I wouldn't have guessed it was owned by anyone. It looked like time had stood still for years. I pulled up with my truck and my dogs, ready to make this place home. But the minute I opened the garage, I got my first welcome gift. A stranger's motorcycle parked like it belonged there. No note, no owner in sight, just chilling in what was now my garage. So, I did what any fed-up homeowner would do. I rolled the damn thing out onto the street. That same evening, an old man came banging on my new gate, clearly pissed about his bike being moved. I didn't answer the door. I didn't have to. From my window, I watched him throw a silent tantrum, stare at the house like he'd just been robbed, and then take the bike and storm off. That should have been my first clue that I'd walked into a different kind of neighborhood. One where lines didn't exist. One where everyone had decided this house, abandoned and forgotten, was fair game. After that, things were calm. Kind of random people would block my gate with their cars, apparently not realizing someone now lived there. I fixed that with a big, bold, no parking sign. It worked like magic, but still, there was something about this place that felt off. Like I wasn't just moving into a house, I was reclaiming stolen land. The way people looked at me, it was as if I'd disturbed their routine of taking advantage. The most curious part, my next-door neighbor, an old man, maybe in his 70s, who lived in a 3-story house directly beside mine. From what I'd heard, he lived alone on the ground floor, while the upper 2 were rented out to tenants. I didn't know much about him at first, but my friends, the previous owners, had given me a little background before handing me the keys. Apparently this guy had been pretty vocal about not wanting the house sold. He liked having an abandoned neighbor. It worked for him. And when he found out someone was finally moving in, he wasn't happy. He'd argued with my friends, tried to scare them into holding on to it, but the deal went through, and I moved in anyway. Still, I wasn't worried. I'm a big guy, 6 feet tall, 3 dogs. Not exactly someone you can push around. And honestly, he didn't try, he didn't say much. He didn't say anything actually. Just gave me those side glances you get from people who think they've lost something that was never really theirs. I figured maybe he'd get used to it. New neighbor, new normal. But looking back, I should have known better. The tension wasn't going away. It was building, and in the middle of all this weird energy, I started to notice something else. Something small. At first the water pressure, not all the time, but randomly. Like while showering, I'd suddenly feel the stream get weak just for a minute or two, then come back full force. And almost every time it happened, I could hear something from the other side of the wall. A low hum. A pump kicking in. Now, if you live in my country, you know exactly what that sound means. That's a water pump sending public supply up to rooftop tanks. Standard in multi-story homes. But it struck me as strange that whenever his pump was on, my pressure dipped. Coincidence? Maybe, but in this neighborhood, nothing felt like coincidence. And this old man had already shown he had a problem with boundaries. I hadn't even been living here a full week, and already my instincts were whispering that something wasn't right. The deal might have been cheap, but this house came with a price I hadn't counted on. And oh boy, I was about to find out just how high that price could go. You know how people say you should always trust your gut? Yeah, it turns out mine was screaming, and I just didn't realize how loud it was. See, the thing about neighborhoods like this, where an abandoned house becomes part of the ecosystem, is that people get comfortable. My moving in was like dropping a bomb on years of routine and silent freeloading, and no one felt that more than my next-door neighbor. Let's talk about this guy. Old, sharp-eyed, and built like one of those mechanics who has spent 40 years under the hood of a car without a single day off. His face had that permanent scowl baked into it, like life owed him something. From the day I moved in, he never greeted me. Never waved, Not even the usual fake politeness you get from passive-aggressive neighbors. Just long stares, the kind you feel in your spine. My friends, the ones who sold me the house, had already warned me. He's troubled, they said. Tried everything to keep us from selling. Said having a new owner would ruin the neighborhood, like he was some kind of self-appointed guardian of the street. But what he really meant, he was losing access to something he didn't want to give up. At first I chalked it up to old man syndrome. You know, the type grumpy about any change, nostalgic for an era when he controlled the block. But he wasn't just annoyed. He was angry. It was subtle at first. Glares when I walked my dogs, muttering under his breath when I was in earshot. Once I caught him standing by my fence, pretending to look at his wall, just standing there staring at nothing. And you know what? I was cool with it. Let the man grumble. I wasn't here to be anyone's friend. I had work to do. Renovations, repairs, upgrades. The house needed love, and I had a vision. So I stayed focused. But he didn't. One day, while the contractors were doing some electrical work, one of them casually mentioned something odd. Hey, your neighbor asked if he could check your water tank setup. Said he wanted to compare it to his. My blood ran cold. Why would anyone want to compare water tanks unless they were already using someone else's? I brushed it off, but now my brain was ticking. Every little detail started coming back. The water pressure drops, the high bills, even when the house was empty. The fact that he lived on the ground floor, so why was he pumping water all the way up? Unless it wasn't for him. That's when it clicked. The other 2 floors were rented out, and those tenants needed running water. So if he wasn't paying for it himself, and wasn't pulling from his own line, who was footing the bill? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but my gut had already decided. This guy was just angry about losing a neighbor-free property. He was angry because his free water buffet was about to close. And sure, it might have only cost me a few bucks a month, but it wasn't about the money, it was about the audacity. So I started watching. Nothing obvious, just small observations. His pump would turn on around the same time every morning, then again in the evening like clockwork. And every time, my water pressure dipped. Just slightly, but enough for me to notice. Still, no proof. Nothing concrete. And trust me, part of me wanted to knock on his door and just say, "Hey old man, quit stealing my water." But that's not how this game works. This wasn't some backyard squabble. No, this was a silent war now, and I wasn't going to fight it with words. I was going to end it with actions. The more I observed, the more I realized just how deeply he depended on that stolen supply. He had it rigged perfectly. My public line was doing all the work. His pump was the middleman, drawing from a line I hadn't even noticed. Somewhere, probably underground, cleverly hidden during the years the house sat empty. It made me mad, not just at him but at myself for not catching it sooner. I mean, who thinks to check their outgoing water pipes? But now that I knew what was happening, the wheels started turning. I didn't need to catch him in the act. I didn't need to call the cops or hire a plumber with a go. No, I just needed to give him enough rope to hang himself. Let him keep stealing juice long enough for me to set the perfect trap, because revenge, real revenge, isn't about confrontation. It's about calculation. So I waited, bided my time. Let him think everything was fine. Let him think I was just another clueless homeowner, too busy fixing up the inside to notice what was happening outside. But I was watching every single day. And when the time came, I was going to turn his little theft into the worst mistake he'd ever made. You ever have one of those moments where everything just clicks? Like, all the weird stuff you've ever been noticing suddenly lines up like a row of dominoes and you realize you were not crazy. You were right all along. That moment hit me in the middle of a shower. It was late. I'd just come home after a long day dealing with contractors, and all I wanted was a hot rinse and a minute to breathe. But as soon as I stepped under the water, I noticed it again. That same annoying pressure drop. 1 second I'm getting a nice strong flow, and the next, it's like someone turned the tap down halfway, barely enough to rinse shampoo out. Now, this wasn't the first time I'd felt it, but this time, it came with a sound, a low hum. Faint, but distinct, like a motor kicking in, and not from my place. I knew exactly what my pump sounded like. This was coming from the other side of the wall. My neighbor's place. I stood there in the shower, frozen. That sound, combined with the drop in pressure, was all the confirmation I needed. His pump was pulling water and I was the one supplying it. Still wrapped in a towel, I walked out into my backyard and just listened. The hum was louder out there. No doubt about it, it was his pump. Probably old and clunky, just like everything else in that damn house. But it worked, and it was working overtime, and I was starting to see why. I tested a theory, waited until I heard the pump switch off. This dull clunk sound followed by silence. Then I ran back inside and opened the kitchen tap. Full pressure. Just like that. It wasn't a one-off. Over the next few days, I repeated the same test, at different times. Morning, evening, night. Every single time his pump kicked on, mine dropped. Every time it stopped, mine surged back. And then I started thinking back, the months before I moved in, when my friends still technically owned the place but hadn't lived here in years. They mentioned odd spikes in their water bill. Probably a leak. They said, old pipes, abandoned house, stuff happens. Except, it wasn't just a leak. Somewhere in that gap, those 3 years when no one was watching, the old man next door, Masvey, thought, why not? The house was empty, the line was active, and water in our country is dirt cheap. Less than $5 a month, even with regular use. For someone with no shame, it was the perfect setup. Free water, no questions asked. And now, he was too comfortable to stop, even with the new owner next door. I'll admit part of me admired the audacity. You've got to be a special kind of shameless to tap into someone else's supply and still glare at them like they were the problem. But admiration quickly turned into irritation. It wasn't about the cost. It wasn't even about the water. It was about what it meant. This guy saw me move in, saw the renovations, saw the gate go up, the sign. The dog's aunt still thought he had a right to keep leeching off me like I was too dumb to notice. That's what pissed me off the most. He didn't just steal water. He'd bet on me being passive. On me being the kind of guy who'd see a little drop in pressure and go, oh well, must be the pipes. And yeah, maybe someone else would have ignored it. Maybe someone else would have thought, it's not worth the drama. Let him have it. But not me. I didn't get this house by being a pushover. I didn't survive this neighborhood by turning the other cheek. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just petty theft. This was war. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to call him out. I wasn't going to file a police report or knock on his door. Nah, that would give him a chance to talk, to deny to play dumb. What I wanted was better. I wanted him to suffer the consequences, without even realizing I was behind it. And if I played this right, I could burn down his little water empire without laying a single finger on his property. No vandalism, no threats. Just one small legal move that would flip his whole setup upside down. All I had to do was wait. Wait for the perfect moment. When his pump was running, tenants were home, and he was most dependent on that sweet stolen stream. Because if he thought he could outsmart me, if he thought I'd just sit back and let him leech, then he was in for a surprise he'd never forget. Revenge doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it starts with a whisper, and sometimes it starts with the sound of your own water pump humming in the dark. Once I knew for sure that my neighbor was siphoning water from my line, it became less about figuring out if it was happening and more about understanding how it was happening. I wasn't going to let him get away with it, not just because of the theft, but because of the arrogance. This man had the gall to steal from me while pretending I didn't exist. He walked around like he owned the block. But now I had something better than anger. I had a mission. It started small, a few quiet walks around my property, just really looking at every pipe, joint, and exposed section of my plumbing. The thing about living in an older house in my country is that lots of renovations happen without permits, without diagrams. Plumbing snakes in and out, sometimes through walls, sometimes underground, and unless you tear it all up, you never quite know where it goes. Still, I wasn't completely clueless. I knew where the main line entered the house, and I could trace most of the internal supply. But there were a couple of pipes old, rusted, barely noticeable, leading out toward the back wall. One of them didn't seem to have a purpose anymore. It wasn't connected to my water tank, nor did it lead to the garden. It just disappeared into the wall. And right behind that wall, my neighbor's property. I stared at that pipe for a long time one morning, coffee in hand, dogs at my feet. If I had to guess, that was the one. It had probably been installed back when the previous owners were planning to connect something outside, maybe a garden tap, maybe an outdoor bathroom, and never got around to finishing it. Then, somewhere along the line, the old man next door got curious and saw an opportunity. I couldn't see what was on his side of the wall, and I wasn't about to climb it and risk That's the thing about revenge, you can't cross the line, because then you lose the high ground. But I didn't need to see it. I was starting to understand this guy's game. He had a 3-story house with tenants on the upper 2 floors and needed water daily for showers, cleaning, cooking. Running a legit water line for all that usage would have cost him, even if it was cheap by global standards. He piggybacked off the empty house next door, tapping the supply, routing it through his own pump system, and delivering it right to the tenants like it was his own. He was literally making money off stolen water, and the more I thought about it, the more brilliant and infuriating it was. The tenants probably thought he was a great landlord. Oh wow, reliable water pressure, good system. Meanwhile, I was footing the bill and dealing with the occasional drop in pressure whenever they showered. So I dug deeper. I checked my past water bills. The numbers weren't adding up. Even back when the house was empty, there had been usage small, but consistent, enough to be suspicious. And the minute I moved in, the spike wasn't massive, but it was steady, like I had a family of 4 living with me when it was just me, 3 dogs, and a car that got washed once a week. I even tested timing. I started keeping a little log. Every time his pump turned on, I noted the time. Then I'd run my own tap. Each time, pressure dipped. Then I'd wait. As soon as the pump cut off, I'd test again. Back to full pressure. It was like clockwork. And then came the final piece of the puzzle, the noise. Our houses were close, walls just a few feet apart. I could hear everything if I listened carefully enough. One night, while sitting out in the garden, I heard the pump switch on, followed by something else. The faint echo of water flowing pipes vibrating slightly against the concrete. Water was being pulled. Actively, I walked over to that rusted pipe at the back of my property and placed my hand on it. Cold, vibrating, not from the inside, like water coming out. No, it was being sucked through. That's when I knew. No more guessing. No more theories. I had him, but knowing wasn't enough. If I really wanted to shut him down and make it stick, I needed a plan. A real one. One that wouldn't just stop the theft but make him regret ever starting it. Calling the cops. Too noisy. What if they didn't find a line? What if he'd hidden it well? I had no legal proof. Just suspicions and some observations. That wouldn't get me very far. Confronting him directly. Pointless, he'd just deny it. Maybe even get defensive. And worse, he'd know I was onto him. Then he'd rip out the line, patch up his system, and I'd lose my one shot. No. If this was going to work, it had to be silent. Precise. Clean. So I sat down and thought, what's the one thing his setup needs to survive? Answer: water flow. Constant water flow from my side. And if that supply suddenly vanished, what would happen? Well, if his tenants were still using taps, and his pump was still working, then it would keep trying to pull water. But with none coming in, which meant it would keep running non-stop. And what happens when an old motor keeps running without water? It burns out. But wait, there's more. In homes like ours, the water pump system isn't just mechanical. It's tied into the electrical wiring, responding to signals from a float valve in the rooftop tank. If the tank never fills up, the pump keeps going. And if the wiring is old, and trust me, I was betting it still looked like something out of 1992, then continuous load could fry the entire setup. Lights, fuses, switches gone. And if that happened while the tenants were home, that wasn't just a broken pump. That was a full-blown crisis. So yeah, I had all the information I needed. The how, the why, the where. All that was left was the when. You might be wondering why go through all this trouble. Over what? A few extra dollars on a water bill. It was never about the money. Sure, I live in a country where water is dirt cheap. My bill, even with 3 dogs, a garden, and weekly car washes, barely scrapes $5 a month. That's not the kind of loss you notice. It doesn't hurt your wallet. Not really, but this wasn't about financial pain. It was about principle. It was about entitlement, the kind that seeps in slowly, like a leak under the floorboards. That neighbor didn't just steal water. He stole peace of mind. He invaded my home without ever stepping foot inside it. He decided, without permission, that something I paid for was now his to use. And the worst part, he thought I wouldn't notice. Or worse, he thought I wouldn't care. That's what lit the fire inside me. The idea that someone saw me move in, watched me take ownership of my space, and still thought, this guy won't do anything. That smug, quiet confidence that I'd be too passive, too polite, too decent to make a move. He didn't just steal water, he insulted my intelligence. He bet on my inaction. And nothing makes me want revenge more than being underestimated. I could have paid 10 times the water bill and still not felt the sting. But knowing that every time I took a shower, some part of that pressure drop was helping his tenants rinse dishes or flush toilets, that's what pushed me over the edge. This wasn't just a neighbor, this was a parasite, living next door, living off me, while acting like he was better than me, pretending to be oblivious, keeping that poker face every time we crossed paths, while his pump quietly sucked away what he didn't earn. And if you've ever dealt with people like that, you know they never stop. Give them an inch, they'll take the whole damn pipe system. They'll smile in your face while robbing you blind. So, yeah, I could have let it slide. I could have patched the pipes, sealed the leak, moved on, But he needed a lesson, not just to stop him from stealing, but to remind him. Actions have consequences. And when you try to freeload off someone who actually pays attention, you don't just lose the free ride, you lose the whole damn train. The best part about revenge, when the person never sees it coming. That was the beauty of my plan. No screaming matches, no door-slamming confrontations, no cops, no paperwork, just me, my quiet suspicion, and one twist of a valve. I didn't need to lift a finger, I just had to be patient. So I waited. I started timing his pump cycles more precisely early mornings between 5:45 and 6:15. Then again in the evenings around 6 p.m. The guy ran his system like clockwork, probably to match his tenants' routines. Showers before work, cooking at night. I figured if I was going to strike, I needed to catch him during a peak usage moment when the tank was low, the pump was on, and everyone inside his house was relying on that stolen stream. That moment came on a Monday morning, 4 days ago. The weather was warm, the skies were clear, and the pump kicked on right at 5:47 a.m. Just as expected, I was already up sipping my first cup of coffee like it was just another start to the week. But it wasn't. I walked over to my front yard where the main water valve sat, tucked inside a small, rusted box next to the wall. I opened it slowly, careful not to make any noise, then reached inside and twisted the handle until the flow stopped cold. That was it. No big dramatic gesture, just a flick of the wrist. And then, silence. Well, not total silence. His pump was still humming away, but now it was pulling nothing but air. The rooftop tank float valve would be sending out a constant signal, more water, and the pump, dumb and obedient, would keep trying. 4 minutes, 4 hours, for as long as it took. I went back inside, calm as ever, and carried on with my day. But I wasn't done watching. Around 9 a.m. I noticed some commotion next door. Footsteps upstairs, loud voices. One of the tenants was clearly upset. I could hear snippets, no water, pressure's gone, call the landlord. Perfect. Now, I wasn't sure exactly how long it would take. Every system reacts differently. Some pumps overheat quickly, others just drone on, slowly wearing themselves down. But what I hadn't accounted for what made this even better was how outdated his entire electrical system was. Old homes like his often still use ancient fuses and poorly insulated wiring. A modern pump can overload that kind of setup if it runs continuously with no water. Over time, resistance builds, heat spikes, and suddenly, you're not just dealing with a broken pump, you're looking at a total electrical failure. And that's exactly what happened. At 3:04 a.m. the next day I was woken up by shouting. Not just one person, a chorus, voices from every floor next door, the sound of someone stomping down the stairs and yelling into the night. They'd lost power, and not just power, everything. Total blackout. The pump had run dry all night, dragging electricity through a system that couldn't take it. Wires must have fried, fuses blown, maybe even a switchboard meltdown. And because it happened in the middle of the night, no one noticed until they were already deep in the mess. I sat by my bedroom window in the dark, sipping water from a bottle, listening. The landlord, my delightful neighbor, was trying to calm them down. I could hear his tired, defeated voice. I'll fix it tomorrow. Don't worry, it's just a fuse. But his tenants weren't having it. Not even close. You promised this wouldn't happen again, one of them yelled. You better refund my rent, screamed another. I couldn't help but smile. The ripple effect. What started with him quietly leaching water had turned into a full-on collapse. Not just his little theft operation, but his reputation, his income, his entire setup. And the best part, I was completely in the clear. I hadn't touched his property, I hadn't called the police, I hadn't even spoken to him. I just turned off my own water. By the next afternoon, one of the tenants was gone, packed up, car loaded, shouting into her phone as she peeled out of the driveway. The other stuck around just long enough to call the authorities. See, in my country, water and electricity are classified as essential utilities. If a landlord fails to provide them and it's not due to weather or municipal issues, they can be fined immediately. The law doesn't play around when it comes to tenants' rights. And these tenants weren't bluffing. They lodged formal complaints. Fast forward 48 hours, and my neighbor was hit with a $500 fine. That's not a small sum here. For a retired mechanic with no income other than rent, it's a knockout punch. On top of that, he now had to refund both security deposits, and because the wiring was deemed unsafe by inspectors, he wasn't legally allowed to rent out the place again until he completely upgraded the system. We're talking thousands, which he didn't have, so what did he do? He packed up his things, called his daughter, and announced he was moving out on Sunday. Couldn't afford to stay, couldn't keep the house running, couldn't even face me properly. He did, however, come to my gate one last time. Middle of the afternoon, sun blazing. He stood outside, hands behind his back, looking almost humbled. "Did you turn off your water supply a few days ago?" he asked, trying to sound casual. I gave him the most innocent smile I could muster. "Oh yeah," I said. "I had a leak near the tank. Plumber couldn't come until the next day, so I shut it off just to be safe." He stared at me for a second, nodded slowly, then walked away. No accusations, no yelling, just quiet defeat, because he knew I knew, but he also knew he couldn't prove a thing. And legally, I'd done nothing wrong. That was the silent beauty of it all. He stole from me, for years felt entitled to it, and when it finally caught up to him, it wasn't karma, or the police, or some dramatic show of power. It was just me, standing in my yard, turning off my own water, and in doing so, I didn't just shut down his pump, I shut down his entire life. The thing about revenge is sometimes, you don't need a front row seat to enjoy the fallout. You just need a quiet window, a clear night, and a front row view of someone else's life collapsing. At exactly 3:04 a.m., it all went down. I wasn't asleep. Couldn't be. I'd stayed up sitting near my open window with the lights off. No music, no distractions, just me, the night air, and the gentle hum of a fan. I'd turned off my main water valve hours ago, and I'd been waiting, listening, anticipating. Then it started. Voices at first just muffled, then sharper, urgent. Slippers slapping across tile, doors creaking open, a series of heavy footsteps running down the stairs next door. And then why is the light off? Try the kitchen switch. Nothing's working. The panic in their voices was unmistakable. Imagine being dead asleep and suddenly realizing the lights don't work, the fan has stopped, and worst of all, there's no water. I could hear the frantic flipping of switches, the sound of a fuse box being opened and slammed shut. Someone even tried the pump again. The low, sputtering cough of the motor trying to start but failing, over and over. Then came the yelling. The tenants had snapped. "This is the third time this month." One screamed, "You said it was fixed. I'm calling the police this time, I don't care." The old man, my lovely neighbor, was trying to keep it together. You could hear him shuffling down the hallway in slippers, muttering in that low, panicked voice older folks use when they trying to sound in control but know they lost it. I think it's a wiring issue. "Maybe the fuse blew again," he stammered. "Again, you think? What kind of slum are you running here?" Slamming, arguing, pure chaos. From my darkened room, I watched shadows dance on their walls, heard a storm of angry voices clash under one roof, and I didn't have to say a word. Every ounce of tension, every inconvenience, every stolen drop of water was now being paid back in full. And the irony, they still didn't know it started with me. All I did was twist a valve, and it was like I'd pulled the trigger on a Rube Goldberg machine of destruction. The electrical system had overloaded. That ancient pump, starved for water, had drawn power like a black hole, heating wires, blowing feet, and likely melting connectors inside old walls. By the time the tenants noticed, the damage was done. The float valve in their tank had shut off the pump because the tank had filled. It never even started. And the motor, with no water to pump, just spun itself into a slow, fiery death. That was the first night they lost everything. The next day, that was when the real show began. By 9 a.m., one tenant was already packing. Bags clattered down the stairs, curses flying out the window. I saw her phone to her ear, likely reporting the issue to the local housing authority. The landlord was outside by mid-morning pacing, looking like a man with nothing left to say. Sweat soaked through his shirt. He wasn't fixing anything, just walking in circles, occasionally shouting up to the tenants, telling them he'd take care of it, but nobody believed him. One tenant flat out said, "I'm calling my cousin. He's a lawyer. You'll be lucky if I don't take you to court." That's the thing about our housing laws. Landlords are on a short leash. You're responsible for water, power, and safe living conditions. Cut any of those off even unintentionally and you're in hot water. Later that evening, a police officer showed up. Just one, calm but clearly fed up. Looked like someone who'd already dealt with this landlord before. The conversation was short. The officer took a report, issued a fine $500 on the spot, and handed over paperwork. The old man didn't argue, he just signed it, like someone who'd finally realized the game was over. By the next morning, both tenants were gone. Security deposits refunded, rooms empty, house silent, and for the first time since I moved in, the neighbor's pump didn't kick on. You'd think I'd feel bad, but I didn't, because this wasn't a one-time mistake. This was 3 years of theft, of freeloading, of entitled glances and bound. This was a man who walked around thinking he was above it all, that the world owed him something, and that he could keep taking without consequence. Until consequence came knocking at 3 a.m. He tried one last time to talk to me, showed up at my gate a few days later, all polite and curious. "Did you turn off your water supply earlier this week?" he asked, like he didn't already know. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Yeah. Had a leak in my roof tank." Lie. Plumber couldn't make it till the next day. The lie was smooth.com/practiced. He stood there for a second, lips twitching like he wanted to say more. But he didn't. He just nodded and walked away. And that was it. No confrontation. Just a broken old man with no tenants, a burned-out pump, a blown fuse box, a police fine, and no income. Moving in with his daughter the following Sunday, because he couldn't afford to live alone anymore. Meanwhile, I had peace, full water pressure, an untouched plumbing system. And best of all, victory. Quiet, legal, clean. Revenge doesn't have to be loud to be effective. Sometimes, the best revenge is the one they can't even prove you delivered. You ever watch someone's life fall apart in slow motion? It's a strange thing. It doesn't happen all at once like a dramatic movie explosion. It unravels, one thread at a time. And if you're really paying attention, you start to see exactly which pull started the whole mess. For my neighbor, that pull was a quiet little twist of my water valve. What followed was nothing short of poetic justice. The morning after the 3 a.m. chaos, I've stepped outside like any other day. Coffee in one hand, leash in the other. My dogs wagged their tails, ready for their morning walk, totally oblivious to the meltdown unfolding next door. But I wasn't. The air felt different. The house beside mine, usually buzzing with morning noise, tenants banging doors, kids yelling, the old man muttering to himself, was eerily quiet. Windows were wide open, but there was no music, no fans, no sound of running water. The tenants were already packing. I saw one of them, a younger woman, hauling a suitcase down the stairs with one hand, angrily swiping on her phone with the other. Her expression, rage mixed with exhaustion. The kind of face you make when you've had enough and aren't sticking around for the next excuse. She didn't say a word to me as she loaded her things into a waiting cab, but she didn't have to. I already knew. I watched as she slammed the car door shut and sped off, leaving behind nothing but a cloud of dust and one less income source for my lovely neighbor. He came out shortly after, shuffling, shirt untucked, eyes puffy like he hadn't slept in days. He looked at her empty window, scratched his head, then went back inside without even bothering to pretend he had a plan. But the worst hadn't hit him yet, not until the second tenant, the older guy on the top floor, made his move. Now this guy wasn't just mad, he was strategic. The type who reads his rental agreement twice, knows his rights, and knows exactly how to hit back when pushed too far. He didn't shout, he didn't pack up right away, he called the police, and not just any cops, housing enforcement. By the time the officer showed up, the old man next door was sweating bullets. You could hear the pleading in his voice from my living room. "No sir, it's just a minor electrical issue, just the pump. I'll have it fixed tomorrow." But the officer wasn't buying it. In our country, tenant protection is serious business. Water and electricity are essential services. If you cut those off even by neglect, doesn't matter if it was a fuse, a pipe, or a mysterious leak. If your property can't provide basic living conditions, you get fined. No hearing, no excuses. And fined he was. $500. On the spot. Now, that might not sound like much in some countries, but here, that's a month's rent, a month of groceries, half the price of rewiring your house, and this man didn't have it. Worse still, the officer also slapped him with a red tag warning. No more tenants until the property was repaired and reinspected. That meant both floors, his own income, were off the market until he spent money to fix things he hadn't touched in decades. So there he stood, old, broke, humiliated, no income, no power, no water, and now, no tenants. And I hadn't even touched his side of the wall. I walked past him that evening, leash in hand again, my dogs pulling gently toward the street. I gave him a small nod, polite neutral, like nothing had happened. He didn't even look up. He just sat on a plastic chair in his porch, staring at the ground like it might open up and swallow him whole. By the end of that week, word had gotten around the neighborhood. People noticed the 4 rent signs had come down. Others saw the power company van roll in, followed by an electrician shaking his head and making a call. Some folks whispered, others avoided eye contact altogether. But me, I slept like a baby. For the first time since moving in, there were no random pump sounds, no pressure dips during showers, My water system worked like a charm, and more importantly, the vibe had shifted. The message was clear. I wasn't someone you could push around because I hadn't just stopped a thief. I'd outplayed him. I could have gone to the authority, could have screamed and demanded compensation, but instead, I let the truth do the heavy lifting. He exposed himself with his own greed. All I had to do was give him the space to fail. And fail, he did. The following Sunday, I saw a small moving truck pull into his driveway. A couple of younger men, probably his relatives, started loading boxes and furniture. Nothing fancy, just a few old appliances, some bags, a mattress rolled up with twine, no goodbyes, no announcements. The old man walked out with a small duffel bag, locked the door behind him, and climbed into the front seat of the truck without even glancing back. He was moving in with his daughter. Couldn't afford to live alone anymore. I watched from my kitchen window, sipping tea, feeling that quiet kind of satisfaction only true justice brings. Was it petty? Maybe, but was it fair? Absolutely. He stole from me, exploited my property, mocked the idea that anyone would ever call him out. And in the end, it wasn't the police, or a court, or some neighborhood fight that brought him down. It was his own arrogance. All I did was flick a switch, cut the supply, let Nietzsche and outdated wiring handle the rest. I never said a word, never raised my voice, never even stepped foot on his land, but I took back control. And the fallout, well, let's just say, it was everything he deserved. There's something deeply satisfying about revenge that doesn't need a second act. You know, the kind where there's no escalation, no follow-up, no mess to clean up, just a clean strike, perfectly placed, and the fallout plays itself out with you sitting comfortably in the front row, watching it all unfold. That's exactly what happened here. But even after everything, the blackout, the fines, the tenant exodus, I still had one final move to make. Not out of necessity, not even for payback, but for closure. You see, even after the old man packed up and left for his daughter's place, there was still one thing left hanging in the air: my plumbing. The old pipe that disappeared into the shed wall. It was still there, still a part of my system. And while I was almost certain he'd never come back or try anything again, I'm not the type to leave loose ends. So I called up a plumber, a good one, someone who knew how to trace lines, find leaks, seal off unnecessary exits, basically clean up the leftover mess from a 3-year freeloading operation. He came over, took one look at the back wall, and said, "You know, this line goes nowhere, right?" "Not anymore," I replied. "Cut it, seal it. I want everything leaving this property to die here." He laughed, but I wasn't joking. A couple of hours later, the mystery pipe was gone. Welded off, buried. No more secret siphoning points. No more question marks. My plumbing was officially mine again, clean, secure, and tamper-proof. That, right there, was the final blow. Not the money lost over the years. Not the sneaky theft. But the fact that he could never do it again. Not to me. Not to the next owner. Not to anyone. He was out of the game for good. And the best part, he knew it. A few days before he left, after all the chaos had settled and his house sat empty, he stopped by one last time. Not to yell, not to threaten, just to confirm what he probably already suspected. He stood at my gate, one hand on the latch, and asked, "You shut off your water that day, didn't you?" I didn't blink. "Oh yeah," I said casually. Had to wait for the plumber, that was it. No accusation, no fight, just silence. He stared for a beat, lips tight, eyes dull. Then he nodded slowly and turned away. He didn't ask another question, because he didn't need to. He knew. He knew why the pump fried, why the wiring melted, why the tenants stormed out, why the fines came knocking. And most of all, he knew I'd beaten him without ever saying a single hostile word. That kind of loss hits harder than any argument. It's the kind that sticks with you. I don't know what his daughter thought when he moved in. Maybe he made up a story, blamed the tenants, the wiring, the city. Maybe he never mentioned me at all. But I guarantee you, when he lies awake at night, staring at the ceiling in someone else's home, he remembers the silence, the cold water, the total darkness, and the realization that it all started with one quiet twist of a valve. I got what I wanted: peace, security, a house that was finally, truly mine. But I also got something more powerful than that. I got the last word without saying one. With the neighbor gone, the house next door was finally quiet. No more pump kicking in at dawn. No more low water pressure during my showers. No more CDs through the fence or fake innocence went caught lurking near my boundary wall. For the first time since I moved in, it felt like the house had finally become a home. The plumber came back the following week for a full overhaul. Not just a patch-up job, this was about closure. He removed the leftover connections, double-checked the internal water routing, and sealed every single external outlet that didn't have a legitimate use. We found 2 other minor points that were capped but not properly sealed. Nothing that had been actively used, but enough to make me glad I followed through. It confirmed what I'd always suspected. This house had been prey for too long. An open, unguarded resource for anyone bold enough to take advantage, but not anymore. By the end of the day, everything was tight, secure, legit, no more leaks, no more free, just me, my dogs, and a place I could finally call mine without looking over my shoulder. It's funny, when I first moved in, all I wanted was to renovate a neglected property, paint some walls, fix a few pipes, put in a gate. I thought the biggest challenge would be finding reliable contractors or dealing with local permit drama. Instead, I ended up in a silent war with a neighbor who had quietly turned my house into his personal utility. And not by yelling, not by banging on doors or filing lawsuits, just by being smarter, by watching, waiting, and then acting at the perfect moment. Looking back, I realized this was never just about water. It was about reclaiming space, drawing a line, saying, "This is mine. You don't get to take from me just because you've got used to doing it." It is a powerful thing knowing you stood your ground without breaking the law or stooping to their level. And now, when I walk through my gate, I feel it in every step. Ownership, control, peace, the kind that can't be stolen or siphoned away, the kind you earn one smart move at a time, and just like that, one twist of a valve, and the king of freeloaders fell from his throne. No shouting, no lawsuits, just pure, calculated revenge served cold and silent. If you loved watching this petty masterpiece unfold, make sure to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss the next tale of karma catching up. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.